Hey everyone, and welcome back. We've got a genuinely fascinating explainer lined up for you today. We hear about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, pretty much every single day in corporate reports. But I recently came across some research that asks a very real, very pressing question. What is actually happening behind all these buzzwords? I mean, seriously, think about it for a second. Are these massive global companies actually forcing their suppliers to go green? Or are they just meticulously filling out the paperwork to make it look like they are? Well, to figure that out, we're going to rely on a brilliant and highly revealing 2026 study by Nicholas van der Nest, which analyzed 30 firms listed on the Singapore Exchange. The findings? They are an absolute eye-opener for anyone interested in business, sustainability, or just how the corporate world actually works behind the scenes. All right. Let's jump right into Section 1, the corporate sustainability boom and the surface success. So, historically, corporate social responsibility was mostly voluntary, right? But today, driven by international frameworks, investors, and regulators, it's really evolved into a strict reporting obligation. And on the surface, it looks like companies are doing an incredible job keeping up. Just look at this number. A flawless 100% of the sampled firms are disclosing Scope 3, or value chain transparency, in their public reporting. That is an absolute, across-the-board success when it comes to reporting on the environmental impact that happens up and down a company's supply chain. It sounds like a total victory for corporate sustainability, doesn't it? Everyone's on board, everyone's reporting it. But hold on a second. Before we go popping the champagne, let's look at another number from that exact same group of companies. 3.3%. Yep, that is it. Only 3.3% of those identical firms, literally one single company out of the 30 sampled, has actual multi-tier supply chain reach disclosed in their reports. This means almost nobody is actually tracking or enforcing these standards deep upstream with the suppliers of their suppliers. The whiplash between what's being claimed and what's actually being tracked is just staggering. Take a look at this chart from the study. See those massive bars up at the top in the middle? That's supplier-sustainability linkage and Scope 3 transparency. They're almost completely full. But down at the bottom, multi-tier reach? It is barely even a blip. This stark contrast perfectly illustrates how widespread alignment with reporting frameworks completely masks the near-total absence of actual upstream traceability. Which brings us to Section 2, presence versus governance depth. So how exactly does this massive drop-off happen? How can a company report 100% on value chain transparency, but only 3.3% on actually reaching into that multi-tier supply chain? Well, to figure this out, we need to distinguish between what the researchers call governance presence and governance depth. Governance presence is really just about disclosure. It's signaling. It's aligning your paperwork with international frameworks so you can check a box and say, yes, we care about the environment. Governance depth, on the other hand, is the demanding reality of action. It's specificity, it's having real consequences for noncompliance, and it's having operational reach deep within your supply chain. Saying the right things on paper is easy. Actually enforcing them in the real world, that is incredibly hard. Let's move on to Section 3, the missing supply chain implementation. When we actually start digging for governance depth, wow, the numbers take a pretty serious turn. 96.7% of these companies align with reporting frameworks. They definitely know how to speak the ESG language. But when we look for actual supplier performance metrics, meaning are they actually measuring how green their suppliers are in practice, that number absolutely plummets to 23.3%. Fewer than a quarter of these companies actually bother to measure if their suppliers are hitting the targets. And honestly, it gets even more concerning. Only 23.3% of the sampled firms disclose mandatory compliance and enforcement. Let that sink in for a minute. This means that for the vast majority of these public expectations, there is zero operational risk for a supplier who fails to comply. If a company doesn't disclose actual consequences, like say suspending or terminating a contract with a bad supplier, then all those big green promises are essentially toothless. The researcher actually put together a weighted governance intensity index to rank these firms, and the final score is just eye-opening. Out of the 30 companies sampled, only 6, literally just 6, achieved full convergence on core supplier governance architecture. The mean score across the board was just 0.547 out of 1. It really shows that while you might be able to assemble a pretty decent reporting profile, building a complete, deeply enforced supplier governance structure is incredibly rare right now. So what's driving this? Let's look at Section 4, the box checking problem. Why do companies spend so much time on reporting if they aren't actually going to follow through? Well, the paper explains this using something called institutional theory. Simply put, organizations often adopt specific governance structures just to gain legitimacy and fit into their environment, rather than for actual technical efficiency. Companies are fundamentally acting out of a need to look legitimate to their investors, to regulators, and to the public. The academic jargon basically breaks this down into three types of pressure. First, you've got coercive pressure. That's regulators saying, you must report this. Next is normative pressure, professional standards saying, this is how a good modern company behaves. And finally, mimetic pressure, which is really just corporate peer pressure. Companies look at their successful rivals and just imitate them to fit in. Together, these pressures drive companies to adopt surface-level disclosures just to survive, without making any structural changes to their actual supply chains. Which leads us to this incredibly powerful quote straight from the study. Formal convergence may establish baseline legitimacy, but it does not by itself demonstrate supplier-facing governance maturity. This perfectly reinforces the concept of decoupling. The public language a company uses about sustainability has become entirely separated from the practical execution within its supply chain. They sound mature on paper, sure, but operationally, they're still just checking boxes. All right, let's look at solutions in Section 5, Building Real Supplier Trust. We've identified the illusion, right? But how do we actually fix it? The key takeaway here is that true buyer-supplier trust isn't an either-or scenario. It's not just about cracking the whip with formal enforcement, like strict mandates and consequence structures. And it's not just holding hands in relational implementation, like collaboration and joint development. It demands both. You need strict rules so suppliers know you're serious, but you also need deeply invested collaboration to actually help them reach those standards. Think of it kind of like a software update. Just like your phone needs an update to fix bugs and run better, corporate sustainability governance desperately needs an update to transition from mere public relations into genuine, credible action. So what exactly is in that update? The author lays out 3 clear, actionable managerial priorities that businesses must adopt to survive this next frontier. Number 1, operational linkage. You have to clearly link your broad sustainability goals to actual measurable supplier obligations. Number 2, enforcement architecture. You need a visible system of monitoring and real consequences. And number 3, relational implementation. You have to actively engage and develop your suppliers rather than just throwing a contract at them and hoping for the best. And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to take away from today's explainer. If you work in a corporate environment, or even if you just invest in one, ask yourself, is your company's sustainability report an actual blueprint for change, or is it just a PR shield designed to check the boxes? The data shows that right now, for a lot of companies, it's just a shield. But by focusing on governance depth, we can actually start making real changes. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this today. Keep asking the hard questions and keep looking past the surface.